Students, we're going to talk about the SAT essay today, and unlike the first two sessions where I spent some time working model problems, this time we're going to talk specifically about what the SAT essay is and how to write it. It would take way too long for me to write an essay in front of you, but I'm going to give you a lot of tools today that you can practice on your own. I highly recommend you set a timer and do some practice essays using the strategies that I'm giving you today, because you write 2 or 3 essays, and I know it's coming up quick, guys, but say at least even just write one, aim for one practice essay before you take the test on the 14th or whatever day you're taking it. It's going to make you feel better, because just like in the other tests that we've talked about, the reading test and the language test, the actual content, the question is going to change, but the structure of the response, the process that you're going to use, it's exactly the same every essay you write on this particular assessment. So let me go ahead and go to a screen share. I put a short PowerPoint or slides presentation together for you, and we'll just kind of go through. I'm hoping all my resources are linked right inside of this presentation. They are also in the share drive in the folder that's titled essay. I'm just going to go ahead and minimize this. There we go. Okay, so we're talking about the SAT essay, and this test, the SAT, this is probably the test portion that is the most different from the ACT, is the essay, but I really like the way SAT does their essay. What is it? Okay, it's a 60-minute assessment. It's optional, but most colleges request that you do it. And basically, I'll show you some sample prompts, but what it is an analysis of an argument. So, you know, the ACT essay was this opinion piece where it would ask you like a question, and then it would ask you to either like defend a claim, challenge a claim, or qualify a claim. This I like a lot better, because you actually are going to read an excerpt of a published argument, and then you're going to critically analyze that argument. And basically, you're going to look at 3 things in that argument. You're going to look at what the argument is, how the argument is constructed, and why the author made those choices. So in many ways, you guys, this is so weird, but in many ways, the SAT essay is more reading than the SAT reading is, because it's asking you to critically read and then write about an argument. I'm going to show you an example, if the link works. Keep your fingers crossed. Okay, so what will happen is it will give you an excerpt to read, and this one is, and you guys all have access to this both through the presentation and through the slides, through the share drive. This will give you an excerpt from an argument. This particular one is from Paul Bogard, Let There Be Dark. It will give you the publishing date. It will give you the title. I highly recommend you read the title, and then you read the excerpt. And then it will ask you to write an essay in which you explain how Paul Bogard built, and here's where I'm reading right here, sorry. Write an essay in which you explain how Paul Bogard builds an argument to persuade his audience that natural darkness should be preserved. In your essay, analyze how Bogard uses one or more of the features in the directions that precede the passage or features of your own choice. And those features will include things like evidence, you know, different literary techniques, okay, to strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of his argument. Be sure that your analysis focuses on the most relevant features of the passage. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with Bogard's claims, but rather explain how Bogard builds an argument to persuade his audience. Every SAT essay is going to start with giving you like things to think about in the excerpt, whether that's use of evidence, use of structure, use of literary devices. All right, then you're going to go and you're going to read the passage, and you're going to say, this is what the person is arguing. This is how the person builds the argument, and this is why they choose to use those strategies to build their arguments. All right. I think a really, really important thing to notice is that the question always tells you very clearly what the essay, what the argument that they're giving you is arguing. So explain how Paul Bogard persuades his audience that natural darkness should be preserved. And I'm sorry, guys, but there's kids with me today. Explain how Paul Bogard builds an argument to persuade his audience how why natural darkness should be preserved. So what that's going to do, and SAT always does this, is it's going to tell you flat out, hey, this is the claim of the argument that you are reading. This is what the author is trying to argue. Then it's your job to figure out what the author uses to create that argument and why the author might make those choices. So let me go back to my slides for a second. We'll talk some more about what that looks like when you're writing an essay. All right, I have a lot of strategies for you to use on this one. And again, I highly recommend you practice. The biggest thing that's different about this particular assessment on the SAT than the other two is that I actually am telling you to read the essay closely. Read it closely. And I actually not only want you to read it closely, I want you to annotate it before you begin writing. I have hyperlinked documents in here that give you tips on how to annotate. So when you are going in to that essay and reading it before you write about it, I highly recommend you annotate for these things. Main ideas, you already know what the claim is because SAT gives it to you. Key points that the author is making, important vocabulary that might be used by the author, dates, evidence, etc. I'm not going to go through and I'm not going to read all these to you right now, but they're there for you to look at. But when I say annotate, those of you who might be going, holy crap, what does she mean when she says annotate? What I mean is mark up the essay. Before you write about it, mark it up. Read it and mark it up. Particularly, SAT likes to talk about evidence. All right, what sort of evidence does the author use to make their arguments? So really pay close attention to that. SAT also really likes you to look at text structures, like compare and contrast, sequence, cause and effect, narration even. Some of these argument pieces will actually use narrative techniques, like telling a story, okay? SAT also likes you to look at any craft choices the author might use that you notice, snapshots, figurative versus literal language like similes, metaphors. Don't feel like you have to get really technical. Really rely on what sort of evidence the author is using, facts, stats, expert opinion, firsthand knowledge, the structures, and then any sort of craft technique you might notice in there. That's what you use to talk about how the author creates their argument. Remember, SAT tells you what the argument is. You need to identify main points in that argument to support it, and then you need to identify the craft decisions used by the author, and that's what I'm asking you to annotate for here. So this annotation step, if you read it and you practice it, will help you break apart an essay to analyze it in your writing response. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the slides. This is so, oh, sorry, skipping. Outline your response before you write it. And I've gone ahead and made something for you guys. And again, if you have time, I highly recommend you practice. I made essay frames for you, all right? You can approach this two different ways. You can approach your writing sequentially, or you can approach it categorically. I'll explain briefly what those differences are. Again, I apologize for the background noise. I'll keep trying to talk over them. Sequentially just means you take the essay, and I'll try to find, you take the essay and you actually move through the essay in the order of the essay. So you're still gonna like analyze their arguments and their craft choices, but you actually just go from the beginning of the essay to the end of the essay. You know, the author begins the argument by, the author continues the argument by, the author closes the argument by, and you actually use the structure of the excerpt SAT gives you to structure your paragraphs in the response. Again, the most useful thing for you here would be to spend some time looking and playing in this document. So if I click back in, trying to find, here we go. If I click back in this sample by Paul Bogard, and I wrote a response to it, you know, I did my introduction where I would introduce the text and the author. So in Paul Bogard's Let There Be Dark, Paul Bogard frames an argument that attempts to persuade his reader that natural darkness should be preserved. He does this by a combination of a structure of, and then I'd fill in the blank, and techniques of, and I'd fill in the blank. In the beginning of his essay, or in the beginning of his argument, Paul Bogard, this is me writing my first body paragraph aloud for you guys. In the beginning of his argument, Paul Bogard narrates, sorry, hold on. Paul Bogard references a personal connection to darkness by referencing a family cabin on Minnesota Lake. He uses that to represent the natural beauty of woods that are so dark that my hands disappeared before my eyes. I would actually quote that piece of text in my argument response. He refers to a childhood that he got to experience where night skies showed meteors which left smoky trails across sugary spreads of stars. Okay, so I would maybe quote that. That imagery emphasized the natural beauty of darkness, which he then contrasts with a current situation where 8 out of 10 children born in the United States will never know a sky dark enough for a Milky Way. The use of that technical evidence to, all right, and what I'm doing right now is I'm talking aloud how I would write this. Basically, though, with the sequential organization frame, I talked about how Paul Bogard starts his arguments. Then I'd get to the middle and I'd start a new paragraph. As Paul Bogard progresses through his argument, he moves from the nostalgia of his childhood and the natural beauty of darkness to discussing the health effects and the logic associated with the need for natural darkness. He does this by referencing expert organizations such as the World Health Organization. So as I'm crafting my essay, I'm actually using the structure of Paul Bogard's beginning, middle, and end to create my body paragraphs in my essay. The other way that you can craft this essay, depending on what works best for you, and the actual excerpt that you're reading, what seems to work best, for that particular prompt, is to do what's called a categorical response, and that's the second frame I give you. And that categorical response is where you actually use the aspects of an argument to organize the response. And I think I did that for you in another example that I wrote for you. And that's, let me look to see, linked here in the strategy list, an example. Here I give you guys a lot of other essay do's and essay don'ts. Please look through those. I'll try to maybe hit a couple here, but this is an example response that I wrote. And in this, I actually use a categorical structure to craft my SAT essay. So again, I do an introduction where I introduce the claim, the claim of the argument, and also the author and the title of the argument. And then, so former President Jimmy Carter argues for the protection of the refuge against development by helping the reader to see the beauty and the importance of this sanctuary through his narration and details in the foreword to Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Seasons of land, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so here I've given the author, the source, and the claim. And then I move into a categorical organization to analyzing it. I start my response by talking about Carter's narrative details, which is one of his strategies that he uses. All right. Then I talk about Carter's use, his tone, and his appeal to morality. in the second paragraph. And then I talk about Carter, a strategy that Carter is using where he's naming animals and the way he uses evidence, which is naming animals in the next paragraph, which is a short one. So I actually added a fourth paragraph where I talked about how Carter uses contrast, compare and contrast, basically a contrast in imagery, to continue his argument. So in this particular example, I'm not going sequentially and organizing my essay sequentially, and you can see that because I'm actually quoting from paragraph 2 up here, and then paragraph 1 up here, down here, and then paragraph 2 here, and then down to paragraph 4 here. So I'm kind of, and then back to paragraph 1, you know, I'm jumping around in the essay, and instead I'm using the different strategies Carter's using to organize my response. And that's called a categorical response structure. And I don't want you to be like too confused if you don't get it. Look at these frames that I made for you. I'm literally blocking out an essay for you guys where you're just plugging in the evidence and you're plugging in your explanation. Play around in these documents. I hope you'll find they're very, very, very helpful if you practice using them. And then obviously you can't bring that to SAT, but if you practice it a couple times, you'll get the idea of how to structure the essay, and it's like, it'll build itself for you, I hope. Let's go back to this. Really important, keep your essay analytical and not argumentative. It doesn't matter if you agree with Paul Bogart about natural darkness or not. It doesn't matter if you agree with Jimmy Carter about the preservation of the wildlife refuge or not. What you think is completely irrelevant. And I don't say that to be rude. I say it because SAT doesn't give a rat's behind about your opinion on this. What they care about is that you can analyze an argument. So your whole purpose in writing this essay is showing, hey, I understood what I read. I understood how the argument is being constructed. I understood why that might be helpful to the argument, and I can write about that. SAT also likes you to write a lot. Oops, sorry. They like you to write a lot. They like you to explain your statements. They like you to give examples from the text showing, oh, here's the strategy. Here's an example of it in the text, and this is why I believe the author used it. I say you should have, when you're done, you know, a short introduction, a short conclusion, and at least 2 really well-developed paragraphs, or a short introduction, a short conclusion, and 3 to 4 lesser developed paragraphs that still have quite, you know, evidence and explanation. Also, use specific words. SAT, I don't want you to try to use big words and make yourself sound really smart, but don't use words like things, stuff, a lot. Don't use general words. Use really specific words. Make sure it's very clear what you're talking about. This strategy list that I already clicked on once here gives you even more do's and don'ts, and I've already talked about some of these. I don't want to go over them again. One thing I do want to mention, or 2 things actually, use a consistent present verb tense. Even though Jimmy Carter wrote his piece about the National Wildlife Refuge years ago, it's speaking to us as readers today. So it's not Jimmy Carter argued that with a past tense. It's Jimmy Carter argues. Jimmy Carter uses. All right. It's all in the present because we are reading the piece in the present. So it's important you keep a present verb tense. Also, 3rd person point of view. Not I believe and I think that and I notice that. Get rid of the I. Definitely no you. It's all 3rd person, he, she, they. Okay? So that gives you, again, there's more here, and there's an example that I wrote. You can get an idea of length and structure here. So please take a look at that. Go back to my slides here for a moment. How is the essay scored? This is really the last thing I'm going to talk to you about, or next to the last thing. You get 3 scores on your SAT essay. The first score is on reading, and that's like, did you get it? Did you get what it was talking about? I want to remind you that in the prompt for the essay, it tells you what the essay is supposed to be arguing. Paul Bogard makes a claim that, or Jimmy Carter in this argues that. Okay, so it will tell you what the essay is what the argument is supposed to be arguing. What it doesn't tell you is the points that the argument makes and the strategies the argument uses, like the type of evidence, the type of structure, the type of literary devices. So if you can identify what the argument is, the points made to support the claim, which SAT actually gives you, that's the reading score. The analysis is when you start to identify, this is, you know, it uses compare and contrast, it uses sequence, it uses narration, that it uses expert opinion for evidence. That's when you start to pull out what the essay uses, how, so the reading is what the essay is saying, the argument is saying. The analysis is how and why. How is the argument constructed, and why might the author choose that? So like Jimmy Carter narrates his experience in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge because he wants us to experience the place firsthand, just like he did, and feel a natural connection to it, because then we'd be more apt to want to protect it. So I just gave you a how and a why. How, he narrates his personal experience. Why, he wants us to personally connect to a place we probably won't visit. And then the third score is on the actual writing. Are you organizing your writing? Are you using specific words? Are you using complete sentences and correct usage? So that's your third score. So ironically, only a third of your score on the writing comes from the writing. That's why I say this is almost more of a reading test than the reading. So those 3 scores are each out of 4. So 12, and I believe you get two complete sets of scores. You have 2 people score it. So I think your complete SAT score will be out of 24. What I've given you here is another link. The blue is another link, and it will take you to a whole set of scored essays. If it opens up, yeah. So there's a table of contents in the corner, an outline, sorry. And so like an essay that scores 2, 1, 1, that would be 2 in reading, 1 in analysis, and 1 in writing. That's pretty dang low. That's a low score. So if you want to look at an essay like that doesn't do well, look at that. If you want to look at an essay that does really well, which would be a 4, 4, 4 score, that's right here. And then there's some in the middle. So when you practice, you can also kind of look to see where you think your essay is lining up. Okay, last thing I'm going to say, then I'll take questions and we'll be on our merry way for the day, and I'll leave Culver's parking lot. Take your time. When people used to do the ACT essay, it was only 30 minutes, and I felt like the students were always rushing and they were still like almost not done. But SAT gives you a full 60 minutes. And I know that the temptation is just to like start cranking out writing right away. Take your time. I have proctored this test, I can't tell you how many times, and I rarely see a student still scrambling to finish their essay at the end of the time period. So what that means is you should take your time and do the reading and the annotation closely, like I asked you to. Then after you annotate, actually pre-write, outline a response. Okay, what are you going to do in paragraph 1? What are you going to do in paragraph 2? What are you going to do in paragraph 3? That will make your actual writing time on your essay a lot more productive. You will more effectively write this essay. You will not get lost in the writing process. You will stay on task, and your writing quality will probably be better. So take your time, and I don't know if you guys can see it because the faces are in front of it right now, but yeah, it says you have 60 minutes. Students rarely use the 60 minutes. Read closely, annotate, pre-write, and then actually draft. Okay, I'm going to go out of the screen share and take questions. I know there's only a few of you, but do you have any questions for me or comments? I hear radio silence. I hope it means that you are not sleeping, that you actually just get it now. You're like, dude, I'm going to go practice this. I'm so excited to start. I'm going to post several sample essay questions along with a couple more practice tests inside of our share drive. I highly, highly hope you find some time this weekend to practice. And for some reason, our recording didn't finalize from the writing and language test. If I have time to do a short video, oh, I got a good question. I'll answer that in just a second, Lily. If I have time to do a short video reminder of what we went through on that SAT writing and language, I totally will. Lily asks a great question. She asks, how do you keep your opinion out of it? You completely focus on the author's opinion only. You are writing to tell what the author is doing, not what you think about it. So what I say is you make the assumption that even if you disagree with the argument, it's a good argument. So like, I don't necessarily agree with Paul Bogard that we should preserve natural darkness. I don't necessarily have to share that opinion, but SAT gave me an argument because it's a good argument. So what makes it a good argument? That's your purpose. What makes it a good argument? What is the argument? And how is the author structuring it in a way that is effective? That's how you keep your opinion out of it. Your argument is, it's a good argument. Let me explain why, okay? So that's how you focus your essay without getting opinionated. Great question, Lily. Any other questions? Tiffany, are we good then? Oh, wait. Can there be a list of different ways that a writer can make his point? Absolutely. What I will try to do for you guys is I will try to, and actually some of it's, if you read that annotation tips document that I gave you, it's already in there. It gives you a list of like evidence types. It gives you a list of structure types. And I will also try to give you a list of craft devices that you might notice in these essays. You obviously can't take those lists with you to the actual test, but if you try to familiarize yourself a little bit, you'll see a lot of them are going to be in common. Okay, so take a look at that annotation document that I linked, and I'll also try to link a craft document for you guys as well. So the other thing I want to encourage you to think about is that honestly, there could be multiple right answers in writing this essay. Like Lily might choose to write about 3 different aspects of the essay than Jasmine does. Jasmine might only have one element of the essay in common with Lily, but they both could write a 4-4-4 essay if they're analyzing it appropriately. So don't feel like SAT says, okay, you have to write about this. That's not the case. There's several things in each of these essays that you could choose to analyze. So if you kind of familiarize yourself with the structure types and the evidence types, and then I'll give you a list of craft strategies, then you just pick the ones that you notice and you feel like you can write about the easiest. Great questions, guys. Any other questions? You think we're good, Tiffany?
I'd say so.
Awesome. Well, you have the recording, right, Tiffany? We're all good on that?
Yes.
Sweet. So if you could put the link on, I hope this has been